The guard dismissed my warning about suspicious behavior. Then the gunman walked in asterisk. I was at the mall with my kids when the security guard approached me, saying my military bearing was making shoppers uncomfortable. He asked me to leave because I was acting suspicious by watching exits and scanning crowds. I was gathering my family to go when we heard the first gunshot. That's when the same guard who'd been escorting me out grabbed my arm and whispered, "Please don't leave." What happens when the suspicious behavior everyone wants gone becomes the only thing standing between them and a mass shooter? If stories like this matter to you, subscribe to our channel. It helps give veterans like me a voice when people mistake vigilance for threat. My name is Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams, 39 years old. I served 3 tours in Iraq, came home to a country that sees military training as a problem until they need it to save their lives. This is the story of how being asked to leave became staying to fight, and why the skills they wanted me to hide became the only reason anyone walked out alive. Asterisk Riverside Mall on a Saturday afternoon was a tactical nightmare. 3 levels, multiple entry points, crowds moving in unpredictable patterns, limited cover, poor sight lines. Everything my 3 tours in Iraq had taught me to avoid, but Sophie needed new school clothes, and Brandon had been promised a trip to the toy store after 2 weeks of good behavior. So here I was, trying to be a normal dad in an environment that triggered every threat assessment instinct. I'd developed dodging insurgents in Baghdad. "Daddy, why are you doing that thing with your eyes?" Sophie asked as we walked past the food court. "What thing?" "That soldier thing where you look at everything like you're counting stuff." I was counting stuff. Exits 4 main ones, plus service, corridors. Security cameras positioned for theft prevention, not threat monitoring. Choke points where crowds could bottleneck during evacuation. Cover positions behind structural columns. Weapon concealment opportunities in trash receptacles. And maintenance areas. Military conditioning didn't come with an off switch. "Just making sure we know where everything is, sweetheart." Brandon tugged on my sleeve, pointing toward the GameStop. "Can we go look at the new racing games?" "Sure, buddy. But we stay together, okay?" I positioned myself at the store entrance, where I could monitor both the interior and the main corridor. Back to the wall, eyes on approach vectors, hands free for rapid response. Standard defensive positioning that had kept me alive through 3 deployments. The same positioning that was apparently making other shoppers uncomfortable. A mother with a stroller changed direction when she saw me, pulling her toddler closer. 2 teenagers stopped their conversation to stare, whispering something about that military guy. An elderly couple gave me a wide berth, the woman clutching her purse tighter. "Dad, people are looking at us weird," Sophie whispered. She was right. I was drawing attention, the wrong kind of attention. In Iraq, blending in meant survival. Here, my inability to blend in was marking my family as different, potentially threatening. "It's okay, sweetheart. Some people just aren't used to seeing soldiers." But that wasn't entirely true. They weren't seeing a soldier. They were seeing someone who moved like he expected contact, who positioned himself like he was preparing for combat, who assessed every person and situation like potential threats. Because that's exactly what I was doing. Brandon emerged from GameStop with a catalog of games he wanted for his birthday. "Dad, can we go to the food court? I want a pretzel." Food court. Open space, multiple approach vectors, hundreds of potential civilians in a concentrated area. Every infantry officer's nightmare for defensive operations. "Sure, son. Let's go get that pretzel." I guided my children through the crowd, automatically noting emergency exits and calculating response times for various threat scenarios. Just another dad buying snacks for his kids, except for the part where I was conducting tactical reconnaissance of a soft target. Environment. No wonder people were staring. Asterisk. By the time we reached the food court, I'd counted at least 6 people who'd changed their walking patterns to avoid me. A family with 3 young children had literally crossed to the other side of the corridor when they saw me approaching. I tried to understand their perspective. Military haircut, alert posture, constant environmental scanning probably looked like someone casing the place for criminal activity rather than protecting his kids during a shopping trip. "Can I get extra cheese on my pretzel?" Brandon asked, oblivious to the social dynamics swirling around us. "Of course, buddy." While waiting in line, I noticed the security guard near the Orange Julius. Mid-40s, soft around the middle, more focused on his phone than crowd monitoring. His positioning was terrible back to multiple approach routes. No clear sight lines to potential trouble areas. Professional habit made me catalog his equipment. Basic radio. No weapon visible. Probably minimal tactical training. Mall security. Existed to deter shoplifting, not respond to serious threats. "Sir, are you in line?" The pretzel vendor was looking at me with the patient expression of someone who'd been trying to get my attention. Behind me, Sophie and Brandon were tugging on my sleeves. "Dad, you're doing the staring thing again," Sophie whispered. She was right. I'd been conducting threat assessment instead of ordering food, scanning for insurgent activity in a suburban. Mall food court. "Sorry, 3 pretzels, please." Extra cheese on 1, but the damage was done. The vendor kept glancing at me nervously while preparing our order. Other customers in line maintained extra distance. A woman with twin daughters, actually, left the line entirely, casting worried looks over her shoulder. "Daddy, why is everyone acting scared of you?" Brandon asked with the brutal honesty of 7-year-olds. How do you explain to a child that 3 years of combat conditioning had left their father unable to relax in public spaces? That every crowded area triggered hypervigilance trained into him by necessity in places where relaxation meant death? Some people don't understand soldiers, son. But you're not being a soldier right now. You're being a dad. Out of the mouths of babes. He was absolutely right. I was being a dad. A dad who happened to have spent 3 tours learning to identify threats, assess vulnerabilities, and prepare for violence that could erupt without warning. The problem was that being a dad and being a soldier had become inseparable in my mind. Marcus Williams? I turned to see Dave Patterson, the security guard I'd been observing. He was approaching with the careful gait of someone trying to appear casual while conducting official business. "Do I know you?" "Dave Patterson, Mall Security. I've had some reports about your behavior today." Sophie and Brandon looked up from their pretzels, sensing the tension in adult voices even if they didn't understand the context. "What kind of reports?" "Shoppers are concerned about someone conducting surveillance of the mall, taking notes about security procedures, acting in a suspicious manner." I hadn't taken any notes, but I had been memorizing everything: exit routes, security gaps, crowd patterns, potential threats. In Iraq, that kind of intelligence gathering was called staying alive. Here, it was called suspicious behavior. I'm shopping with my kids. Shopping while conducting what appears to be reconnaissance of our facility. I'm a veteran. Situational awareness is automatic. Patterson's expression shifted slightly, but not toward understanding. More like confirmation of something he'd suspected. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me." "Come with you where?" I asked, keeping my voice level despite the adrenaline surge. "Security office. We need to discuss your activities today." Sophie moved closer to my side, her pretzel forgotten. Brandon looked confused, not understanding why the security guard was treating his father like a criminal. "What activities? Shopping with my children is illegal now? Multiple witnesses report you memorizing exit locations, studying security camera positions, conducting surveillance of our facility and patrons." Patterson was right about everything except the intent. I had been doing all those things, but not for criminal purposes, for protective ones. The same way I'd studied every forward operating base, every patrol route, every civilian gathering, place in Iraq, on assessing the environment. It's automatic for military personnel. Sir, this is a shopping mall, not a combat zone. Every environment is potentially hostile. That's what 3 deployments teach you. Patterson's radio crackled with static, and I caught fragments of conversation about situation in food court and possible surveillance subject. Other security guards were approaching 2 more uniforms, heading our way with purposeful strides. Shoppers were beginning to notice the commotion, some pulling out phones to record whatever was about to happen. "Daddy, are we in trouble?" Brandon asked quietly. "No, son. There's just been a misunderstanding." But I could see Patterson's perspective. Strange man conducting detailed reconnaissance of a soft target, memorizing security procedures, positioning himself tactically throughout the facility. If I were mall security and someone reported that behavior, I'd investigate too. The problem was that investigation and accusation looked identical from my position. "Sir, I need to see identification and an explanation for your behavior today." I pulled out my driver's license, noting how the simple action caused both backup guards to tense slightly. They were treating me like a potential threat, hands moving closer to their radios, positioning themselves to flank my position. "Marcus Williams, local resident, Iraq veteran, father of 2, I said, handing over my ID. "My behavior is called situational awareness. It's how I kept my soldiers alive overseas. This isn't overseas, Mr. Williams. Threats don't respect geography, officer. I'm not an officer. I'm private security. And right now, you're disrupting normal shopping operations." Normal. There was that word again. The expectation that veterans should turn off their training like a switch, pretend they'd never learned to read environments for danger signals, ignore every instinct that had kept them breathing in hostile territory. How am I disrupting anything? Your behavior is making other customers uncomfortable. Families are avoiding areas where you're positioned. Store employees have expressed concern about your activities. Sophie tugged on my sleeve. "Dad, people are staring at us." She was right. A crowd was gathering shoppers, drawn by the drama of security guards, confronting someone in the food court. Phones were recording, capturing whatever story they thought was unfolding. From their perspective, probably looked like security stopping a potential threat. A man whose behavior had triggered enough concern to warrant official intervention. "Mr. Williams, I'm going to need you to explain why you've been memorizing our security procedures." "I haven't been memorizing anything. I've been shopping while maintaining awareness of my environment. Witnesses report you studying exit routes, camera positions, guard rotations, and crowd patterns. All true. All automatic. All the result of military conditioning that had kept me alive through 3 tours, but was now marking me as suspicious in my own community. That's called being a responsible parent in an uncertain world." Patterson keyed his radio. "Control, I need additional units to the food court. Situation escalating with surveillance subject." Surveillance subject. I'd gone from concerned father to security threat in the space of a pretzel purchase. "Sir, this is getting out of hand," I said, trying to de-escalate. "I'm here with my children, spending money at your stores. I've committed no crimes, threatened no one, disrupted nothing. Your presence is disruptive by its nature. Multiple families have complained about feeling unsafe around you." The irony was stunning. My hypervigilance designed to protect people was making people feel threatened. The same skills that had saved lives in Iraq were creating fear in suburban California. 2 more security guards arrived, flanking Patterson with the coordinated movement of people who'd practiced crowd-controlled procedures. Shoppers backed away, creating a widening circle around our confrontation. "Daddy, I want to go home," Sophie whispered, pressing against my leg. "It's okay, sweetheart. We'll go home soon." But Patterson had other plans. "Mr. Williams, I need you to accompany us to the security office for further questioning." "Questioning about what?" Shopping while veteran? Suspicious behavior, consistent with criminal reconnaissance. Criminal reconnaissance. Military terminology applied to military conditioning, except they saw it as threat assessment rather than protection protocol. I'm not going anywhere without understanding what laws I've allegedly broken. You haven't broken laws yet. But your behavior indicates potential for future criminal activity. Pre-crime policing based on behavioral profiling. They were detaining me for thinking like a soldier while existing as a civilian. Dad, people are taking pictures, Brandon said, pointing to the growing crowd of phone-wielding spectators. He was right. Our confrontation was being documented by dozens of strangers, probably already uploaded to social media with hashtags about suspicious behavior and mall security. Mr. Williams, you're creating a scene, Patterson said. The longer you resist cooperation, the more disruptive this becomes. I'm not resisting anything. I'm asking for clarification about why being aware of my surroundings is considered criminal behavior. Because your version of awareness looks like surveillance to trained security personnel. Trained. Patterson had probably completed a weekend course in crowd management and shoplifting prevention. I'd completed 3 years of advanced tactical training in environments where mistakes cost lives. Your training recognizes surveillance. My training recognizes threats. We're both doing our jobs. Your job is shopping. My job is security. And right now, you're a security concern. Sophie started crying quiet tears that broke my heart. Brandon moved closer, instinctively seeking protection from adults who turned hostile for reasons he couldn't understand. Please don't upset my children over a misunderstanding. Then cooperate with our investigation. Investigation? Into what? Walking through a mall while possessing military experience and protective instincts? The crowd was growing larger, more phones recording, more speculation about what kind of threat required 3 security guards to confront 1 man and 2 children. Fine, I said finally. But my kids don't need to be part of whatever process you think is necessary. Your children will be supervised while we discuss your activities. Supervised. Like I was being arrested rather than questioned about shopping patterns that had triggered civilian anxiety. This is insane. I'm a United States veteran shopping with my family. And right now, you're a security concern in a private facility, where management has authority to regulate behavior. He was right about the law, wrong about the justice. Private property meant private rules, even when those rules criminalized military conditioning that served protective rather than threatening purposes. Looked at my children scared, confused, embarrassed by their father's treatment in a place that should have felt safe and normal. Maybe that was the real tragedy. Not just that I couldn't feel normal in civilian spaces, but that my abnormality was being passed to my kids through public humiliation. The security office conversation lasted 20 minutes of circular questioning about my suspicious activities. Patterson and his supervisor, a woman named Janet Morrison, treated me like a potential terrorist rather than a protective father. Mr. Williams, your behavior today fits the profile of someone planning criminal activity, Morrison explained. Detailed reconnaissance, security assessment, tactical positioning. My behavior fits the profile of someone trained to stay alive in dangerous environments. This isn't a dangerous environment. It's a family shopping center. Every environment is potentially dangerous. That's what military service teaches you. Morrison consulted her notes, probably documenting everything for a report that would follow me into their security database. Multiple witnesses reported feeling threatened by your presence. Store employees expressed concern about your activities. Our guards observed behavior consistent with hostile surveillance. Hostile surveillance. They'd taken protective awareness and reframed it as criminal intent. I observed exit routes because that's automatic for anyone who's been in combat. I positioned myself tactically because that's how I've learned to protect my family. I studied crowd patterns because understanding your environment is basic survival. This isn't a survival situation, Mr. Williams. Every situation is potentially a survival situation. Patterson leaned forward. Sir, with respect, your military experience is making you see threats that don't exist. My military experience is making me prepared for threats that might exist. But that preparation is disruptive to normal civilian operations. Normal civilian operations. The phrase summarized everything wrong with how society treated veterans' expectation that we'd abandon hard-earned skills because they made other people uncomfortable. So what's your solution? Morrison answered without hesitation. We need you to leave the premises. Today and for the foreseeable future. You're banning me from the mall? We're asking you to shop elsewhere until you can modify your behavior to conform with civilian expectations. Modify my behavior. Suppress 3 years of combat conditioning. Pretend I'd never learned to read environments for threats, assess security vulnerabilities, or position myself protectively. And if I refuse, then we'll contact local police and file trespassing charges. They had me. Private property, private rules, private authority to exclude people whose military training made civilians nervous. Fine, I'll leave. Thank you for your cooperation. Cooperation. Like I had a choice. Patterson escorted me back to the food court, where Sophie and Brandon waited with another guard, looking small and scared among the dispersing crowd of spectators. Daddy, are we in trouble? Sophie asked as I approached. No, sweetheart, we're just leaving early. Because of the mean security man? Patterson heard her comment and had the grace to look uncomfortable. I'm not mean, young lady. I'm just doing my job. Your job is being mean to my daddy? Out of the mouths of babes. 7-year-old logic cutting through adult complexity to the essential truth. My job is keeping everyone safe, Patterson explained. My daddy keeps us safe, Brandon replied with fierce loyalty. He's a soldier. Your daddy is a good man who just needs to understand civilian rules. Civilian rules. Different from military rules, apparently. Civilian rules said protective awareness was suspicious behavior. Military rules said protective awareness was survival. As we walked toward the exit, Patterson maintained his lecture about appropriate behavior in civilian spaces. Mr. Williams, I understand your training creates certain habits, but those habits make other people nervous. Other people's nervousness doesn't negate my responsibility to protect my family. But your protection methods are disruptive to community peace. Community peace. Built on the assumption that bad things happen to other people in other places, not to normal families in safe shopping centers. We reached the mall entrance where I'd planned to spend the afternoon helping my kids pick out school clothes and enjoy normal family activities. I hope you understand this isn't personal, Patterson said. It felt personal. It felt like punishment for military service, discrimination against training that had kept me alive long enough to come home and be a father. I understand perfectly. Patterson nodded and turned to walk back into the mall, leaving me standing outside with 2 confused children and a trunk full of questions about how to be a veteran in a society that wanted soldiers overseas, but not citizens at home. That's when we heard the first gunshot. The crack of gunfire was unmistakable semi-automatic rifle. High-velocity rounds coming from inside the mall. My combat conditioning activated instantly, adrenaline flooding my system as 3 years of combat experience took control. Get down, I shouted, pushing Sophie and Brandon behind a concrete planter while scanning for the threat source. More shots. Rapid fire, multiple rounds coming from the food court area we'd just left. Screams followed, the high-pitched terror of civilians encountering violence they'd never imagined possible. Patterson appeared at the mall entrance, his face white. With shock, radio clutched in his trembling hand. Shots fired, he was shouting into the device. Active shooter in the food court. We need police, paramedics, SWAT. But his voice carried panic, not control. Security training hadn't prepared him for this. I moved toward the entrance, my military training automatically assessing the tactical situation. Single shooter, based on the firing pattern. Semi-automatic weapon, probably rifle caliber. Positioned in the food court, which meant maximum civilian exposure and limited escape routes. "Marcus!" Patterson grabbed my arm as I approached. "Thank God you're still here. I don't know what to do." The same man who'd spent 30 minutes treating me like a terrorist was now begging for help from the military training he just banned from the premises. "How many shooters?" I asked, slipping into combat mode. "I don't know. Shots from the food court. People running everywhere." "Radio traffic? Other guards reporting?" Patterson's hands shook as he tried to work his radio. "Static. Can't reach anyone inside." More gunfire erupted. Closer now. The shooter was moving, probably pursuing fleeing civilians or advancing to new positions. Standard active shooter methodology, maximum casualties through mobility and sustained fire. "Kids, stay behind this planter," I told Sophie and Brandon. "Do not move unless I tell you to move." "Daddy, what's happening?" Sophie's voice was small and scared. "Bad man with a gun." "But Daddy's going to stop him." "You can't go in there," Patterson protested. "You'll get killed." "I'm trained for this. You're not. Wait for police." Police response time is 8 to 12 minutes. How many people die while we wait? Through the glass doors, I could see chaos people, running in random directions, falling, trampling each other in panic. The uncontrolled evacuation I'd feared, creating more casualties than the gunfire itself. "Give me your radio," I ordered Patterson. "What? Your radio? Now." He handed it over with shaking hands. I keyed the device, using command voice that cut through static and panic. "All security personnel, this is Staff Sergeant Williams, Iraq veteran. I'm assuming tactical command of the emergency response. Acknowledge by location. Silence." Then crackling responses from guards throughout the mall voices, relieved to hear someone who sounded like they knew what they were doing. "Security 1, Northwest Corridor. Security 2, Service Level. Security 3, East Entrance. Good. Maintain your positions. Guide civilians to exits away from the food court. Do not attempt to engage the shooter. That's my job." I looked at Patterson, who was staring at me like I'd just transformed from security threat to savior. "The man you were escorting out for suspicious behavior?" I said. That suspicious behavior was combat training. And right now, it's the only thing standing between that shooter and a massacre. "Marcus, please don't leave us." "I'm not leaving. I'm doing what I was trained to do." I checked my watch 3 minutes since the first shots. In Iraq, 3 minutes was an eternity during contact. Here, it was just the beginning of something that would get much worse without immediate intervention. "Keep my kids safe," I told Patterson. "That's an order." Then I moved toward the sound of gunfire, leaving behind the mall that had rejected my military training and entering the combat zone where that training would save lives. The mall interior was chaos. Civilians ran in every direction, creating dangerous bottlenecks at exits, trampling the fallen, screaming for help that wasn't coming. Everything I'd observed during my suspicious reconnaissance now became critical. Intelligence for tactical response. I moved through the panic with purpose, using the same skills Patterson had found threatening to navigate toward the sound of gunfire. Stay low, use cover, assess threats, protect civilians. The shooter was in the food court, exactly where I'd been conducting my earlier surveillance. His position gave him commanding fields of fire across the mall's central area, with multiple escape routes if pressured. Kevin Blake, I'd learned his name later, was methodical in his attack. Tactical gear, semi-automatic rifle, high-capacity magazines. He wasn't firing randomly. He was engaging specific targets with the patience of someone who'd planned this operation extensively. I keyed Patterson's radio. All security units, give. Me eyes on the shooter, security 2 here. Gunman in food court, black tactical gear, rifle, moving between positions. Casualties? Multiple down. People trapped behind overturned tables. Anyone attempting medical aid? Negative. Too dangerous to approach. The tactical picture was clear. Professional shooter, prepared for extended engagement, positioned to maximize casualties while minimizing his own exposure. Standard asymmetric warfare, adapted for civilian target environment. But Blake hadn't expected military opposition. I used my knowledge of the mall layout gained during my earlier suspicious behavior to plan an approach route that would avoid his primary fields of fire. Service corridors, maintenance areas, blind spots that mall security would never notice, but infantry training had cataloged automatically. Security 1, can you guide civilians away from the food court area? Already doing it, sir. But people are panicking, not following directions. Keep trying. Channel them toward exits. I observed earlier northwest service door, east loading dock, south emergency exit near the anchor store. How do you know about those exits? Because I spent 2 hours today memorizing this facility's layout while you thought I was conducting criminal surveillance. The irony wasn't lost on me. My threatening behavior was now tactical intelligence that could save lives. I reached the upper level, overlooking the food court, gaining elevated position that infantry doctrine called high ground advantage. From here, I could observe Blake's movement patterns, identify his position, and plan engagement strategy. He was good. Military bearing, professional weapon handling, systematic target selection. This wasn't random violence. It was tactical. Operation executed by someone with advanced training. Security 3, I need you to create noise distraction at the east entrance. Draw his attention away from trapped civilians. What kind of noise? Anything. Fire alarm, announcement system, dropped equipment. Make him think police are entering from that direction. Roger that. Blake had positioned himself behind overturned tables, using civilian furniture as defensive positions while maintaining offensive capability. Smart tactics that showed respect for potential counterattack, but his defensive positioning revealed a weakness, limited mobility. He'd chosen cover that protected him from anticipated police response, but restricted his ability to reposition quickly if threatened from unexpected directions. I began moving toward that weakness, using the service corridors I'd memorized during my suspicious mall reconnaissance. Every step took me closer to a man with superior firepower and tactical equipment, but inferior knowledge of the terrain in Iraq. Local knowledge trumped equipment advantages. Here my detailed observation. Of mall layout, the same observation that had gotten me ejected was about to become Blake's biggest disadvantage. All units, I'm moving to engage. Continue civilian evacuation through secondary exits. Do not approach the food court until you hear from me. Sir, you don't have weapons or tactical gear. I have training and intelligence. That's enough. It had to be enough. Because every minute Blake remained operational, more people died. And stopping him was exactly what 3 years of combat experience had prepared me to do. Asterisk, the evacuation was a disaster. Hundreds of people trying to squeeze through exits designed for normal traffic, crushing each other in panic-driven stampedes. I watched from the upper level as the same crowd dynamics that had made me suspicious now threatened to kill more people than Blake's rifle. Security 1, the northwest exit is blocked by fallen civilians. People are trampling each other. Security 2, similar situation at east entrance. Mass panic, no organization. This was why military doctrine emphasized controlled withdrawal over chaotic retreat. Unorganized evacuation created casualties, even without enemy contact. I keyed. The radio with command authority learned in Iraq. All units, stop the stampede. Channel civilians into organized groups. Control the flow. How? They're not listening to us. Make them listen. Use command voice. Establish choke point control. Physically direct traffic if necessary. But mall security guards weren't trained for crowd control under combat conditions. They were trained to handle shoplifters and medical emergencies, not tactical evacuation during active shooter situations. I could see the problem developing. More people would die from trampling than gunshots if someone didn't organize the evacuation. Blake's greatest force multiplier wasn't his rifle. It was civilian panic. Security 3. Establish rally points at each exit. Get people to stop running and start following directions. Sir, they're terrified. They won't listen to mall security. He was right. In crisis situations, people followed confidence and competence, not uniforms and authority. Mall security looked as scared as the civilians they were trying to help. Needed to be down there, organizing the evacuation using military crowd control techniques. But engaging Blake required different skills and couldn't be delayed while people trampled each other at exit points. The tactical dilemma every infantry officer learned. You couldn't be everywhere at once, couldn't solve every problem simultaneously. You had to prioritize based on greatest threat and maximum impact. Security 1. I need you to relay instructions to civilian evacuees. What instructions? Tell them a military veteran is coordinating the response. Tell them to follow security directions because organized evacuation saves lives. Tell them panic kills more people than bullets. Will they believe that? They'll believe confidence. Project certainty, even if you don't feel it. Through the glass, I watched Blake methodically engaging targets in the food court. His rate of fire was controlled. Disciplined, not the random spraying of an amateur, but the precise shooting of someone with advanced marksmanship training, professional execution that demanded professional response. But first, the evacuation had to be controlled. I couldn't engage Blake while civilians were trapped in his field of fire by their own panic. All units implement traffic control protocols. Physical barriers if necessary, human chains if possible. Channel people away from the food court toward exits Blake can't observe. How do you know which exits he can't observe? Because I spent 2 hours today studying sight lines and fields of fire while mall security thought I was planning criminal activity. The same suspicious behavior that had gotten me ejected was now providing tactical intelligence that could save dozens of lives. Security 2. I need crowd control at the main entrance. People are bottlenecking, creating crush hazard. Understood. Using physical barriers to channel flow. Good. Remember, organized withdrawal saves lives. Panic kills. I watched the evacuation slowly becoming more controlled as security guards implemented basic crowd management techniques. Not perfect, but functional enough to prevent mass trampling casualties. Blake had stopped firing, probably reloading or repositioning. The momentary silence gave trapped civilians opportunity to move toward organized evacuation points. Sir, we've got maybe 50 people still trapped in the food court area. Can they reach the exits? Not without crossing Blake's field of fire. That decided my tactical priority. Engage Blake first. Create opportunity for final evacuation second. Standard. Infantry doctrine neutralize the threat, then exploit the tactical advantage. All units maintain evacuation operations. I'm going after the shooter. Sir, wait for police backup. Police response time is still 6 minutes out. That's 6 minutes of continued casualties. I left my observation position and moved toward Blake's location, using service routes that would bring me within engagement range from his blind spot. Time to prove that suspicious behavior and criminal reconnaissance were actually combat preparation and tactical intelligence. I reached the service level directly above Blake's position, using maintenance access routes I'd observed during my earlier surveillance of the mall. The same detailed reconnaissance that had marked me as suspicious now provided tactical advantage over someone who'd studied the facility's public areas but missed its infrastructure. Blake was repositioning, moving from his initial firing position toward trapped civilians who'd taken cover behind overturned tables. Methodical execution, professional discipline, but limited knowledge of the mall's layout beyond customer areas. Security 1, status on civilian evacuation? Maybe 30 people still trapped in food court, too scared to move. Blake's position? Behind the orange Julius counter, east side of food court. Perfect. His chosen cover provided protection from anticipated police entry points, but left him exposed to approach from the service level. Military training without local intelligence, dangerous. Combination for him, tactical opportunity for me. I moved to position directly above his location, using the same elevated observation post I'd identified during my earlier threat assessment. Every piece of suspicious behavior Patterson had documented was now proving its protective value. All units, I'm in position to engage. Continue evacuation operations. Guide civilians away from food court area. Sir, you're not armed. Blake has tactical gear and high-powered rifle. I have superior positioning and element of surprise. That's enough. It had to be enough. In Iraq, we'd learned that equipment advantages could be overcome by tactical intelligence and psychological pressure. Blake expected organized police response from predictable entry points. He wasn't prepared for individual engagement from unexpected direction. I observed his movement pattern for 30 seconds, noting his weapon handling, reload intervals, and attention focus. Professional execution, but predictable methodology. He was following a plan, which meant he was vulnerable to improvisation. Security 2, I need noise distraction from the main entrance. Make Blake think police entry is imminent. What kind of distraction? Announce police arrival over the PA system. Create perception of imminent assault from his anticipated threat vector. Roger that. The announcement echoed through the mall. Attention shoppers. Police have arrived and are entering the building. All civilians evacuate immediately through marked exits. Blake's head turned toward the main entrance, exactly as I'd predicted. His attention focused on the threat he expected, rather than the threat I represented. Dropped from the service level to the upper floor of the food court. Landing behind Blake's position with the silent movement, learned through 3 years of urban warfare. Drop your weapon. Blake spun toward my voice, rifle swinging in my direction. But his tactical gear and heavy weapon made him slower than my combat-conditioned reflexes. I closed distance before he could acquire target, using hand-to-hand combat techniques to disrupt his aim while staying inside. His weapon's effective engagement range, the rifle discharge into the ceiling as we struggled. Blake's superior equipment negated by my superior positioning and close-quarters training. Security units, shots fired but situation under control. Continue civilian evacuation. Blake was strong, well-trained, determined to complete his mission. But he was fighting someone who had learned infantry combat in places where mistakes meant death, not just failure. I used his tactical gear against him, heavy vest that restricted movement, equipment straps that provided handholds, helmet that limited peripheral vision. Every piece of professional equipment became vulnerability in close quarters engagement. You're military, Blake gasped during our struggle. Iraq veteran, 3 tours. I'm former Army too. Then you know how this ends. He did know. Military training recognized superior tactical position and combat experience when confronted with it. Blake had planned for police response, civilian panic, security guard resistance. He hadn't planned for individual veteran with detailed facility, knowledge, and advanced combat training. The rifle clattered across the floor as I applied leverage techniques learned in military hand-to-hand combat courses. Blake's tactical advantage disappeared the moment engagement moved to close quarters. Stay down, I commanded, using the same voice that had controlled soldiers under fire in Baghdad. Blake complied, his military conditioning responding to legitimate authority even in criminal context. Security 1, shooter neutralized. Safe to approach food court for medical assistance to casualties. Copy that. Police ETA 2 minutes. Good. Tell them the threat is contained by military veteran. Weapon. Secured. Suspect in custody. I looked around the food court where my children and I had been sharing pretzels 2 hours earlier. Overturned tables, shattered glass, evidence of violence that had been stopped by the same suspicious behavior mall security had found so threatening. Blake stared up at me with the recognition of one combat veteran, acknowledging another's superior execution. How? He asked. You studied this place for weeks. I studied it for 2 hours. But I studied it right. Police arrived to find the active shooter situation resolved, Blake in custody, and an organized evacuation in progress. The SWAT team that had expected urban warfare found controlled chaos managed by mall security following military-style tactical protocols. Who's in command here? Demanded Lieutenant Sarah Coleman, SWAT team leader. Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams, Iraq veteran, I replied, maintaining pressure on Blake while keeping his rifle secured. Threat neutralized, facility secured, civilian evacuation 90% complete. Coleman surveyed the scene: overturned tables, scattered tactical gear, one subdued shooter, and a food court that looked like aftermath of controlled engagement rather than random massacre. You took down an active shooter with no weapons? I used superior tactical positioning and facility knowledge gained through prior reconnaissance. Prior reconnaissance? Patterson appeared behind the SWAT team, still shaken but no longer panicked. He'd been studying the mall layout all day. We thought he was planning criminal activity. He was conducting threat assessment, I corrected, which is why I knew every exit route, security weakness, and tactical position when the real threat materialized. Coleman processed this information while her team secured Blake and began evidence collection. How many casualties? 3 wounded, no fatalities. Could have been dozens without organized evacuation and rapid threat neutralization. You coordinated the evacuation too? Someone had to. Mall security lacked training for tactical crowd control under combat conditions. Coleman keyed her radio. Control, active shooter situation at Riverside Mall is contained. 1 suspect in custody, multiple wounded, no fatalities. Civilian response coordinated by military veteran on scene. While SWAT processed the scene, I moved to check on trapped civilians who were emerging from cover positions throughout the food court. Elderly couple behind the pretzel stand, teenagers under tables, young mother with infant who'd been pinned down for 20 minutes. Is it over? Asked the mother, clutching her baby. It's over. Paramedics are coming to check everyone for injuries. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for saving us. I helped her stand, noting minor cuts from broken glass, but no serious wounds. The controlled engagement had minimized collateral damage, precise application of force, rather than overwhelming firepower. Security 1, what's the status on remaining civilians? Last group evacuating through northwest exit. Facility will be clear in 5 minutes. Good work. Tell your team they performed exceptionally under impossible conditions. Patterson approached, while paramedics treated the wounded. His earlier hostility had been replaced by something approaching respect, though still mixed with confusion. Marcus, I owe you an apology. You owe me nothing. You are doing your job based on information available. Your information was better than ours. My information was different. Military threat assessment versus civilian security protocols. How did you know he was coming? I didn't. But I knew the facility was vulnerable because I'd observed its security weaknesses during my earlier visit. Patterson looked around the food court, processing the tactical implications of what had just occurred. The behavior we found suspicious: studying exits, memorizing layouts, positioning yourself defensively. That was combat preparation. That was situational awareness. In military context, it's called staying alive. In civilian context, apparently, it's called suspicious behavior. But it saved lives today. It saved lives because someone trained to recognize and respond to threats was present when threats materialized. Coleman rejoined our conversation, having completed initial scene assessment. Mr. Williams will need detailed statements about the engagement sequence and tactical decisions. Of course. But first, I need to check on my children. Your children were here during the shooting? They were outside with mall security when Blake opened fire. I need to confirm their safety. Coleman nodded toward the exit. Go. We'll debrief later. I walked through the mall. I'd been ejected from 2 hours earlier, past evidence markers and crime scene tape, toward the entrance where Sophie and Brandon waited with Patterson's colleague, the same facility that had found my military conditioning. Threatening now owed its survival to that. Conditioning. Sometimes suspicious behavior and protective preparation were identical activities, viewed from different perspectives. Today, perspective had made all the difference between tragedy and survival. Blake's interrogation revealed the scope of his planning. 3 weeks of surveillance, detailed facility maps, civilian pattern analysis, security protocol assessment. Everything needed for maximum casualty operation in a soft target environment. He'd been watching them all for weeks, Detective Rodriguez explained during my debrief. Photos of peak traffic times, guard rotations, evacuation routes. Professional-level intelligence gathering. Same kind of reconnaissance that got me ejected for suspicious behavior. Except his intent was offensive. Yours was defensive. The difference was intent, not methodology. Blake and I had both studied the facility extensively, memorized layouts and security procedures, positioned ourselves tactically throughout the space. But Blake had planned mass murder. I'd planned family protection. How did he select this target? I asked. Soft target with high civilian density, minimal security response capability, multiple approach and escape routes. Textbook active shooter selection criteria. Blake had chosen Riverside Mall because it was vulnerable exactly to vulnerabilities I'd identified during my suspicious behavior earlier that day. Did he know about my presence during his planning? Negative. Your family visit was random timing that disrupted his operational plan. Random timing. If my VA appointment hadn't run late, if Sophie hadn't needed school clothes, if Patterson hadn't ejected me for suspicious behavior, Blake would have encountered no organized resistance. His tactical plan assumed standard civilian panic response and delayed police intervention, Rodriguez continued. He wasn't prepared for immediate military countermeasures or detailed facility intelligence that exceeded his own reconnaissance. Blake had spent weeks studying the mall's public areas. I'd spent 2 hours studying its tactical characteristics: exits, choke points, defensive positions, fields of fire, civilian surveillance versus military threat assessment. Same data, different applications. The psychological profile suggests Blake targeted this location specifically because of its security weaknesses, Rodriguez noted. Weaknesses I'd identified and could exploit defensively when needed. Your behavioral conditioning saved lives, Marcus. The same conditioning that made civilians uncomfortable. I thought about the irony: military training that marked me as suspicious in peaceful environments became essential when those environments turned violent. Blake was military too? Former Army, discharged for disciplinary problems. He understood tactical principles but lacked your combat experience. Combat experience makes the difference between theoretical knowledge and practical application. He had better equipment but worse intelligence. You had better intelligence and superior tactics. Blake's rifle, tactical gear, and planned approach had been neutralized by positioning, facility knowledge, and close quarters expertise. Where is he now? Federal custody. multiple terrorism charges, weapons violations, attempted mass murder. Life sentence minimum. Blake's military service had taken him down a path that ended with planning civilian massacres. Mine had taken me down a path that ended with preventing them. Same training, different choices, opposite outcomes. Will there be more like him? Probably, but hopefully there will be more like you too. Veterans who used their training to protect rather than destroy, who channeled military skills towards civilian safety rather than civilian harm. The mall wants to honor you publicly, Rodriguez mentioned. The same mall that ejected me for suspicious behavior? People's perspectives change when they understand the difference between threat and protection. Sometimes it took crisis to reveal that difference. Sometimes suspicious behavior and heroic preparation were identical until tested by real danger. The engagement lasted 90 seconds from first contact to Blake's surrender. 90 seconds of close-quarters combat that validated 3 years of military training and justified 2 hours of suspicious facility reconnaissance. Walk me through the tactical sequence, Lieutenant Coleman requested during formal debrief. Blake was positioned behind Orange Julius counter, rifle trained on trapped civilians. I approached from service level using elevation advantage and superior facility knowledge. Superior facility knowledge? I'd memorized every access route, sightline, and defensive position during my earlier visit. Blake had studied public areas, but missed infrastructure details. Coleman reviewed crime scene photos, showing my approach route service corridors, maintenance access, elevated positions that didn't appear on standard facility maps. How did you identify these routes? Military conditioning. Automatic threat. ASSESSMENT includes escape routes, defensive positions, and tactical advantages. Civilian security focuses on theft prevention, not combat operations. Blake had professional equipment and training. Blake had theoretical knowledge and superior firepower. I had practical experience and better intelligence. The engagement had demonstrated classic military principle: intelligence trumps equipment when properly applied. Describe the close quarters phase. Blake's tactical gear limited his mobility. His rifle was ineffective at close range. His training was theoretical rather than experiential. I'd close distance before Blake could acquire effective target, using his equipment weight against him while applying hand-to-hand. Techniques learned through actual combat rather than classroom instruction. He was former military too. Former military with disciplinary discharge versus combat veteran with multiple deployments. Training alone doesn't create combat effectiveness. Coleman made notes about tactical methodology and decision-making under pressure. At what point did you determine lethal force wasn't necessary? When Blake's military conditioning responded to superior authority. He recognized tactical defeat and complied with surrender commands. Blake had fought professionally, but surrendered appropriately when confronted with superior training and positioning. Could you have killed him? Yes, but neutralization accomplished the mission without unnecessary casualties. Military doctrine emphasized minimum force necessary to achieve tactical objectives. Blake's surrender eliminated need for lethal response. How did you maintain command authority over mall security during the crisis? Military, bearing, and tactical competence. They recognized expertise and followed leadership that produced results. Patterson and his team had responded to confidence and competence rather than official authority. Natural human response during crisis situations. Were you concerned about civilian casualties during the engagement? Constantly. Every tactical decision prioritized civilian safety over personal security or operational convenience. The engagement had required balancing multiple factors, neutralizing Blake, protecting trapped civilians, coordinating evacuation, and maintaining situational control. Post-incident analysis suggests your intervention prevented dozens of casualties. Blake's plan called for sustained fire over 15 to 20 minutes until police response. I stopped him after 6 minutes, using skills that mall security had found suspicious, using skills that civilian conditioning doesn't recognize as protective rather than threatening. Coleman closed her notebook, having documented the tactical sequence for official records. Marcus, you saved lives today. But more importantly, you showed that military training has civilian applications beyond what most people understand. Military training is about protecting people. The enemy changes, but the mission remains constant. Think you'll return to this mall? Probably. My kids still need school clothes. Coleman smiled. I suspect your reception will be different next. Time. Different perspective, same person, same training. The skills that had marked me as suspicious would remain unchanged. But maybe civilian understanding of those skills would evolve. Sometimes it took crisis to reveal the difference between threat and protection, between dangerous behavior and defensive preparation. Blake had represented actual danger. I'd represented perceived threat. Crisis had clarified which was which. Blake's capture ended the immediate threat, but the investigation revealed how close the mall had come to a massacre. His planning documents showed target casualty estimates of 60 to 80 people, sustained fire plan lasting 20 minutes, and escape routes that would have allowed him to relocate and continue the attack. Without your intervention, this would have been one of the deadliest mall shootings in U.S. history. FBI agent Sarah Mitchell explained during the federal debrief. Blake's tactical plan had been sophisticated multiple firing positions, ammunition, caches, diversionary tactics to delay police response. Professional military training applied to civilian target environment. How did he select this facility? Vulnerability assessment. High civilian density, minimal security response, multiple approach vectors, limited law enforcement presence. The same factors that made Riverside Mall attractive to families made it attractive to predators planning mass casualty events. His intelligence gathering was extensive. Agent Mitchell showed me Blake's surveillance, files photos of peak traffic, periods, security patrol schedules, civilian movement patterns, facility layout analysis. 3 weeks of detailed reconnaissance. But he missed critical infrastructure details that you identified in 2 hours. Different training, different focus. Blake studied target characteristics. I studied tactical opportunities. Your threat assessment was more comprehensive than his target analysis. Blake had focused on maximizing casualties. I'd focused on minimizing vulnerabilities. The psychological evaluation suggests Blake selected targets he perceived as defenseless, soft targets with minimal resistance capability. But his definition of minimal resistance didn't account for military veterans with tactical training. Blake's plan had assumed civilian panic, security guard inadequacy, and delayed police response. He hadn't planned for immediate military countermeasures from someone with superior facility knowledge. Your presence was random timing that disrupted a carefully planned operation. Random timing that had saved dozens of lives. If my family hadn't needed school shopping, if my VA appointment hadn't run late, if Patterson hadn't ejected me for suspicious behavior, Blake would have faced no organized resistance. But tactical analysis shows your engagement strategy was textbook counterterrorism. Close quarters combat, superior intelligence, psychological pressure, minimum necessary force. Against an opponent with better equipment and comparable training. Better equipment, inferior training. Blake had classroom knowledge. I had combat experience. The difference had been decisive theoretical preparation versus practical application under real-world conditions. Mall management wants to discuss security improvements based on your recommendations. Same recommendations that got me ejected for suspicious behavior? Same observations, different context. Crisis changes perspective on military conditioning. Agent Mitchell reviewed Blake's interrogation transcripts, noting his surprise at encountering organized resistance. He assumed civilian facilities meant civilian-level defensive capabilities, assumption that ignored veteran population with applicable skills, skills that civilian society often finds threatening rather than protective. Blake had been surprised by military opposition because society taught him that veterans were damaged goods, not defensive assets. Post-incident analysis will be used for federal training programs on active shooter response. What will it recommend? Integration of veteran expertise in civilian security planning, recognition of military conditioning as protective rather than threatening, improved coordination between civilian and military communities. Maybe Blake's attack would produce positive changes in how society viewed veteran capabilities. One final question, Marcus. Would you do it again? Protect civilians from armed threats? Every time, even knowing it might cost your life? Especially knowing it might save others. That was the difference between Blake and me. He'd used military training to harm innocents. I'd used it to protect them. Same foundation, opposite applications, different moral choices. Military training wasn't inherently good or evil. It was a tool that reflected the character of the person wielding it. Blake had chosen destruction. I'd chosen protection. The outcome demonstrated which choice served society better. The media coverage began within hours. Veterans stop small shooter. Military training saves lives. Hero Dad prevents massacre. Headlines that transformed me from suspicious person to local celebrity overnight. But the most meaningful recognition came from Patterson himself. Marcus, I owe you more than an apology, he said during our follow-up meeting. I owe you acknowledgement that everything I found suspicious was actually protective preparation. You were doing your job based on reasonable interpretation of unusual behavior. Reasonable interpretation based on ignorance about military conditioning. I saw threat where I should have seen protection. Patterson had spent the week reviewing security footage of my earlier mall visit, noting how my suspicious behavior had actually been comprehensive threat assessment. Every position you took provided maximum observation of potential threat vectors. Every route you walked optimized defensive response opportunities. Standard situational awareness for anyone trained in tactical operations. But it looked like criminal surveillance to civilian security perspective. The same behavior, interpreted through different experiential filters, had produced opposite conclusions about my intentions. What changed your perspective? Watching you coordinate the crisis response. Military leadership, tactical competence, civilian protection as primary objective. Everything you'd been doing all day, just under different circumstances. Patterson had realized that military conditioning didn't switch on during emergencies. It was constant, automatic, and protective rather than threatening. Mall management wants to offer you permanent security consultant position. Consulting on what? Everything. Emergency response protocols, threat assessment procedures, staff training, facility security improvements. The same facility that had ejected me for suspicious behavior now wanted to pay for that expertise, based on recommendations I made during my criminal surveillance visit, based on intelligence that saved lives when crisis materialized. The irony was complete behavior that had marked me as security threat was now recognized as security asset. The other mall tenants want similar consultations. Word spread about your tactical response. Military veterans provide security expertise that civilian facilities often lack. But civilian facilities often view military expertise as threatening, rather than protective, until crisis reveals the difference. Patterson nodded, understanding the social dynamics that had led to our earlier confrontation. How do we change that? How do we recognize veteran capabilities before emergencies prove their value? Education. Understanding that military conditioning serves protective purposes in civilian contexts. You'd be willing to provide that education? I thought about Blake's attack, about the casualties that had been prevented, about the lives saved by training that society often viewed with suspicion. Veterans want to serve their communities. Most of us just need communities that understand how we can serve. This community understands now. This community learned through crisis. Better to learn through education. Patterson extended his hand. Partners in community security? Partners in changing perspective on veteran capabilities. We shook hands, former adversaries who'd learned that military training and civilian safety were complementary rather than contradictory objectives. One question, Marcus. How did you stay so calm during the engagement? Training and experience. But mostly understanding that this was exactly what I'd been prepared to do. Save lives, protect people. The enemy changes, but the mission remains constant. Patterson smiled. Welcome to Civilian Community Protection Services. Thanks for the welcome and the recognition. Sometimes it took crisis to reveal value. Sometimes suspicion and appreciation were separated only by circumstance and understanding. Today, circumstance had provided understanding that would benefit the entire community. Asterisk. The public apology came from mall management during a community meeting 2 weeks after Blake's attack. CEO Jennifer Martinez stood before an audience of shoppers, employees, and media representatives to address what she called a fundamental misunderstanding of protective versus threatening behavior. Mr. Williams was conducting professional threat assessment while we interpreted his actions as suspicious surveillance, Martinez explained. Our security staff's concerns were understandable, but ultimately misguided. I sat in the front row with Sophie and Brandon, who'd been invited as special guests rather than children of suspicious person. The transformation in community perception was remarkable. We failed to recognize that military training serves protective purposes in civilian environments, Martinez continued. Mr. Williams' expertise could have improved our security long before crisis forced us to appreciate its value. Patterson stepped to the podium, visibly uncomfortable with public speaking, but committed to acknowledging his role in the misunderstanding. Treated Staff Sergeant Williams as a potential threat when he was actually our greatest security asset, he admitted. Military conditioning looks suspicious to civilian eyes that don't understand its protective nature. The audience included several other veterans, nodding with recognition of experiences they'd shared being viewed with suspicion for behaviors designed to protect rather than threaten. How many other veterans have been discouraged from participating in community activities because their training makes civilians uncomfortable? Martinez asked. The question hung in the air like a challenge to everyone present. Dr. Susan Walsh, a local psychologist specializing in veteran issues, addressed the crowd about military conditioning and civilian integration. Combat training creates heightened awareness that serves protective functions in all environments, she explained. Society benefits when we recognize these capabilities as assets rather than viewing them as threats. Several business owners requested information about veteran security consultations. The hardware store wanted threat assessment for customer safety. The community center asked about emergency response planning. Local schools inquired about safety protocol development. We're establishing a veteran community integration program, Martinez announced, connecting military expertise with civilian security needs while educating the public about protective versus threatening behaviors. Sophie tugged on my sleeve. Daddy, are you famous now? Not famous, sweetheart, just understood. What's the difference? Famous means people know about you. Understood means people know why you do things. The meeting concluded with Martinez presenting me with a Community Service Award and formal invitation to serve as security consultant for the entire shopping district. Your expertise has value beyond crisis response, she said. Preventive security serves community interests better than reactive measures. After the ceremony, several veterans approached to share their own experiences with civilian misunderstanding of military conditioning. People see threat where we see protection, observed Tom Rodriguez, a Marine veteran, until crisis proves them wrong. Maybe that's changing, suggested Maria Santos, Army veteran and mother of 3. This incident might help civilians understand veteran capabilities. Patterson joined our conversation, still processing the week's revelations about military training and civilian perception. How do we prevent future misunderstandings? He asked. Education, I replied. Help people understand that situational awareness is protective behavior, not threatening surveillance. Would you be willing to train our security staff about recognizing veteran behaviors? I'd be willing to train them about utilizing veteran expertise. There's a difference. Recognizing is passive. Utilizing is active. One acknowledges veteran capabilities. The other employs them for community benefit. Patterson nodded, understanding that integration served everyone better than mere tolerance. When do we start? We already have. This conversation is the beginning of understanding that military training serves civilian protection when properly recognized and appropriately utilized. The community had learned through crisis what it could have learned through education, that veteran capabilities enhanced, rather than threatened civilian safety. Sometimes the hardest lessons were also the most valuable ones. 3 months after Blake's attack, I found myself teaching veteran integration and community security to law enforcement agencies across the state. The course curriculum focused on recognizing military conditioning as protective rather than threatening behavior. Military veterans conduct automatic threat assessment in all environments. I explained to a class of police officers and security personnel. This conditioning appears suspicious to civilian observers, but serves protective functions for entire communities. Lieutenant Coleman, who'd responded to the mall shooting, helped develop the training program after recognizing how veteran expertise could enhance civilian security operations. The mall incident demonstrated that military training provides capabilities civilian security often lacks, she told each class. Intelligence gathering, tactical assessment, crisis leadership, emergency coordination skills that benefit everyone. When properly utilized, the training sessions attracted diverse audiences: shopping center managers, school administrators, community event coordinators, business owners. Everyone wanted to understand how to recognize and utilize veteran expertise, rather than viewing it with suspicion. How do we distinguish between protective awareness and threatening surveillance? Asked Janet Morrison, a mall security supervisor. Intent and behavior patterns, I explained. Protective awareness focuses on family safety, exit identification, and crowd monitoring. Threatening surveillance focuses on vulnerability assessment, target selection, and operational planning. Both might look similar to untrained observers, which is why education matters. Understanding military conditioning prevents misinterpretation of protective behavior as criminal activity. Patterson attended every session, having become an advocate for veteran community integration after learning how his suspicions had nearly cost lives. I treated expertise as threat because I didn't understand its protective purpose, he told each class. Military training scared me when it should have. Reassured me. The psychological component was crucial. Dr. Walsh helped develop curriculum sections addressing civilian anxiety about military capabilities and veteran frustration with community suspicion. Combat training creates behaviors that serve protective functions but appear threatening to people without military experience, she explained. Education bridges that gap by teaching recognition of intent rather than reaction to appearance. Sophie and Brandon occasionally joined presentations, explaining how their father's soldier habits had always made them feel safer rather than restricted. Daddy teaches us to be aware, not scared, Sophie told a group of school administrators. There's a difference. What's the difference? Asked Principal Henderson. Scared means hiding from bad things. Aware means being ready if bad things happen. And your father's military training helps with that awareness? His training helps everyone be safer. That's why soldiers exist, to protect people. The mouths of babes cutting through adult complexity to essential truth. Federal agencies began incorporating our training model into active shooter response protocols and community policing programs. The FBI requested consultation on recognizing veteran capabilities during crisis situations. Military veterans often become natural leaders during emergencies. Agent Mitchell noted, law enforcement benefits from recognizing and coordinating with that expertise rather than viewing it as interference. The program expanded beyond security applications. Emergency management agencies wanted veteran involvement in disaster response planning. Community organizations sought military expertise in event coordination and crowd management. Veterans want to serve their communities. I told government officials developing integration programs. Most just need communities that understand how to utilize their capabilities. The transformation was remarkable. Within 6 months, several communities had established veteran community resource programs, connecting military expertise with civilian needs while educating residents about protective versus threatening behaviors. You've changed how society views veteran integration, Dr. Walsh observed during a program evaluation meeting. Society changed its own perspective. Crisis just provided the catalyst. What's next? National expansion. Every community has veterans with applicable skills. Every community faces security challenges that military expertise can address. Ambitious goal, necessary goal. Blake won't be the last person to target civilian facilities, but maybe he'll be among the last to encounter no organized resistance. Patterson smiled at that assessment. Because communities will recognize veteran capabilities as assets rather than viewing them as threats. Because communities will understand that military training serves protective purposes whether the enemy wears uniforms or tactical gear, whether the battlefield is overseas or in suburban shopping centers. The lesson was universal. Veteran skills enhanced civilian safety when properly understood and appropriately utilized. Crisis had taught what education should have provided, that military conditioning and community security were complementary rather than contradictory objectives. Sometimes, the most important victories happened long after the shooting stopped. Asterisk. 1 year later, I returned to Riverside Mall as an honored guest for the grand reopening of their renovated food court. The same space where Blake had planned mass murder now featured improved security measures, emergency response protocols, and a memorial honoring the 3 people wounded in his attack. Sophie and Brandon walked beside me through corridors that had once made their father suspicious to other shoppers. Now families recognized me as the veteran who'd saved lives. Children waved. Parents thanked me for my service in ways that felt genuine rather than obligatory. Dad, people look at you different now, Brandon observed. They understand me different now. What changed? Nothing about me changed. Everything about their understanding changed. Patterson met us at the main entrance, wearing a supervisor's badge that reflected his promotion to head of security. His training now included veteran recognition protocols and military expertise utilization. Marcus, welcome back to your mall. My mall? Community voted. Your honorary security consultant. For life. The title was symbolic, but meaningful recognition that military expertise belonged in civilian spaces, that veteran capabilities enhanced rather than threatened community safety. How's the new security program working? Remarkably well. We've identified 12 veterans among regular shoppers, coordinated with local law enforcement on emergency response protocols, and implemented threat assessment procedures based on your recommendations. The same recommendations that got me ejected for suspicious behavior? The same intelligence that saved lives when properly understood and appropriately applied. The memorial service was brief, but powerful. 3 people who'd survived Blake's. Patak spoke about the importance of preparedness, community integration, and recognizing protective capabilities in unexpected places. Staff Sergeant Williams represented everything we'd been taught to fear about military veterans. said Maria Gonzalez, a mother who'd been shopping with her infant when Blake opened fire. Hypervigilant, tactically positioned, constantly assessing threats, but those same characteristics saved our lives. The audience included dozens of veterans who'd participated in community integration programs developed after the mall incident. Their presence was welcomed rather than tolerated. Their expertise valued rather than feared. We learned that military conditioning serves protective functions in all environments, said Mayor Patricia Johnson. Crisis taught us what education should have provided. Dr. Walsh addressed the crowd about societal attitudes toward veteran capabilities and the importance of understanding protective versus threatening behaviors. Military training creates heightened awareness that benefits entire communities when properly recognized and appropriately utilized, she explained. Society advances when we view veteran expertise as asset rather than treating it as liability. After the ceremony, several families approached to share stories about how the Veteran Integration Program had improved their sense of community security. We sleep better knowing trained personnel are watching for threats we might miss, said Tom Patterson, Dave's brother and a father of 3. And we function better knowing our military training is appreciated rather than feared, replied Sarah Martinez, a Navy veteran who'd become community emergency coordinator. That evening, Sophie asked the question that had been building for months. Dad, are you glad the bad man tried to hurt people? I'm glad I was there to stop him. I'm not glad he chose violence. But if he hadn't done bad things, people wouldn't understand that you do good things. 12-year-old wisdom that captured the essential tragedy and triumph of the entire experience. Sweetheart, I wish people could understand veteran capabilities without crisis proving their value. Maybe now they can. Maybe other dads like you won't have to prove themselves before people trust them. She was right. The community integration programs, law enforcement training, and educational initiatives had created pathways for veteran expertise that didn't require crisis validation. Your dad's not special because he stopped a bad man, Brandon added with 7-year-old clarity. He's special because he was ready to stop bad men. Preparation, the core of military training, the foundation of veteran value, the essence of protective capability that civilian society was finally beginning to understand and appreciate. Looked around the renovated food court where families shared meals, in safety enhanced by military training, protected by veteran expertise, secured by community understanding that had emerged from crisis but would endure through. Education. Blake had intended mass murder. Instead, he'd created mass understanding of veteran value and military capability applied to civilian protection. Sometimes, the most important victories looked different than expected, but achieved everything that mattered. If you made it this far, thank you for understanding that military training serves protective purposes, whether the battlefield is overseas or in shopping centers. Comment below and tell us where you're watching from. It reminds us that veteran expertise exists in every community, protecting people who might never realize they're being protected. And if you know a veteran whose military conditioning makes civilians uncomfortable, remind them that crisis often reveals what education should have taught, that protective preparation and threatening behavior are opposites, not equivalents. We came home to serve our communities. Sometimes communities just need help understanding how we can serve. The mission continues. The uniform changes. The protection remains constant.